Hey everybody, welcome to another awesome Kickstarter video. Today I'm with two of our contributors, Kienna Shaw and also James Mendez who are both going to be are writing for Sea of Legends, and they also create a lot of really cool content in RPG and RPG related content, I should say, as well. RPG paraphernalia.
Sure.
That's
Yeah.
Sure, we'll call it that.
I don't know if that's appropriate. But yeah, so welcome all.
Hey,
Yeah,
thanks for having us.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So just to right off the bat here, I think the thing I'm curious about to start for both of you is how did you get into writing and designing for games, and like why? Why would you do such a thing?
Do such a thing. I'll hop in first.
Sure.
So I've always been a writer, and since I was very little, but I got into interactive fiction writing when I was in high school and university. So that was kind of my start into looking into game design. I really enjoyed video games, so that was originally my first branch. And then when I started getting to tabletop RPGs, for the longest time I was like, yeah, I don't really want to design anything for it. And then Game Jam on Itch.io happened, and I went, well, I could design a game, maybe, but the deadline's tomorrow, so I won't do it. And then the next day, my school got closed because of a snowstorm. And I'm like, well, I guess I'm writing a game. So I was really just looking to experiment and try to make a new experience, pulling on my own knowledge and experience with tabletop games, with interactive fiction, with video games, and all that stuff. And it's just been going from there.
And it just happens, and then no one stopped you.
Yeah,
You're
no
like,
one stopped me.
Keep doing it, actually, please.
Yeah. And I get paid for it now.
That's great. That's like, you're like, you do when you, I feel like when you start like with games or thinking about games as a career, you like, I felt like I didn't even like, and like, there's no way anyone's ever gonna pay me to do this. That's ridiculous. That's not a real job.
And here we are.
Right? And I think that's so great though that you started with interactive fiction, because it's like absolutely what we're doing here with Sea of Legends and with the branching narrative. And I'm kind of curious, what kind of interactive fiction, was it like was it tied into some property you like, or was it
No,
like
it was just for it was all for writing classes at first, actually, and it was through Twine, which is one of the most common user-friendly interactive fiction platforms out there. And so I was just kind of doing it to dabble, and I didn't know how to program. I didn't know how to do any of the computer science stuff, so I thought it was a really easy way for me to get into making games without having to have that background knowledge, or without having to have skills in drawing or arts or anything, because I do not.
Yeah, that's so cool. So you just figured out on your own.
Yeah, yeah, it was a lot of self-learning and a lot of looking at other people's great work out there. Porpentine is one of my favorite interactive fiction authors out there. Really does some really interesting stuff with it. So that was like one of the foundational, oh, I could make a thing from here. So yeah, definitely was just kind of, I just go into the deep end for most things that I do. I just go, I kind of want to do this thing, and I just throw myself into the deep end, and eventually I'll figure it out.
So you give yourself the sink or swim treatment, and it's been working out.
It's been working out so far.
Rad. Oh, that's great. Well, Mendez, what about you?
I'd say I got into game writing out of desperation. Yeah, so I majored in religion, focusing on West African and Afro-Atlantic religion. And then I minored in dance, focusing on martial arts and North Indian classical dance, and also minored in English lit. So I didn't have a lot of options.
There wasn't an obvious career path?
No, there really wasn't. And I bounced around from bad job to bad job until I went to grad school. And then to balance out all the useless things that I'd learned about in undergrad, I got a master's degree in Eastern Classics, so great books of Japan, China, and India, just making it worse. And then I got out of grad school, with everyone staring at this guy like, okay, how long is he going to survive, huh? And I worked at a game store for a little bit, like running after school games for kids. Then I was a tutor for a while. And this whole time, to prevent myself from becoming very sad, I went to a lot of conventions and I ran a lot of games at conventions. And then one day, um, sort of a bunch of my friends started emailing me all at once asking whether I wanted to um, write role-playing games, and I did. And then things just kind of got out of hand, and I started doing it full time. Uh, and so the longest time, I was writing Seventh Sea for John Wick Presents, R.I.P. Full time.
Yeah, how did that happen? Like, that was one of the first things where I was like, oh wow, 7th Sea, all right, we're doing pirates, yes.
Yeah. So I think so. One day, a friend video called me, and he wanted to convince me to do something else. And he asked me, "Oh yeah, by the way, I'm involved in this 7th Sea thing. I don't suppose you're looking for, I don't know, a full-time game writing job right now, are you?" And I was like, yes, yes. Is that real? Is this a joke? Is that a real thing? And it was a real thing for like a year and a half. And then it wasn't a real thing anymore. But that was when I started getting into cultural consulting. And because almost all of the game writing that I'd been doing was people coming to me being like, "Hey, can you please write this culture I'm too afraid to write?" And I said, well, there's nothing else I can do with my degrees, so yes. I hope you ask someone from that culture first, but sure. And
Right.
So I did that for a long time. And through that kind of writing, I got a lot of practice in what eventually became my like sensitivity reading and cultural consulting skill set. And then I started making cultural consulting a bigger and bigger part of my job. And it turned out that I like that more, partly because I'm inherently a collaborator. I much prefer to work with other people than alone by myself. So quarantine's fun, let me tell you, from that perspective. But I also found that after, like, writing is cool, but after 5 hours of writing, I feel tired. But after 5 hours of telling people that they're racist, I feel energized. So it's a better, more efficient use of time.
Wow. Yes, that's a great way of putting it. I was gonna say, first of all, I just like how both of your origin stories are like, well, Kienna's like, I was stuck in a snowstorm. And you're like,
it was
well,
a snowstorm. God made me design a game.
Basically.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm not going to do it. It's the deadline tomorrow, midnight. I'm not going to do this to myself. Wake up next morning. Oh, school's canceled.
It was an act of nature. Yeah.
Yeah. I blacked out, and 14 hours later, there was a game on itch.io.
These are really the two paths, is like very specific academic route or force of nature blackout.
Yes.
Yeah.
Tips for any aspiring designers watching. But I'm actually really wanted to take a minute to say, could you actually sort of break down more of like, what is sensitivity reading? What is cultural consultation? And like, I think recently, finally, a lot of game publishers are really taking it seriously. And I'd love to hear, why it's important, obviously it's important to you, but why it's important for all of us, how we all benefit from this. That's really like 2 or 3 questions in one, but.
Okay, so I think the term sensitivity reading is a little older than the term cultural consulting, at least in our industry. So 10 or 20 years ago, a cultural consultant was someone who usually worked with like C-level executives in the business world. And so suppose you're an American company and you're merging with a German company, and all the employees from both countries are going to get mixed up together. And you think, well, they're European white people, we're American white people doing business. Things are going to be fine, right? Very often they weren't fine. in the business world. And so cultural consultants would work one-on-one with people in that situation to make situations like that easier. If you're going to go overseas and take a really important job in a country you'd never been to before, and you wanted more background than just the language, you might go to a cultural consultant and they might help you make that transition. And then I culturally appropriated that term because so sensitivity reading was a thing that often happened in the later stages of novel writing. So if you have an author who didn't share the background of some characters or some settings in their story, the publisher, when the manuscript was almost finished, would come to a sensitivity reader and have them check it over to make sure everything was okay and see if any changes needed to be made. The trouble with this approach is that when the draft is almost finished, usually it's too late to make major structural changes that would actually solve some of those problems. So authors who have been in that situation and their publisher hasn't brought in the cultural consultant or the sensitivity reader until the very end, have often found themselves in like really stressful positions where they might have to like pull the book or publish it later or something like that. The change that I've been trying to make with sensitivity reading to cultural consulting is to use that term to represent bringing the consultant in earlier in the process. If I can get involved in the brainstorming outline first draft phase, then the 1 hour of helping people represent people from different cultures, religions, backgrounds than them, that can be a lot more useful than it can in the later stages of the work. And in that stage also, it becomes a lot more like creative and fun because at that stage, okay, so I should probably do a definition of cultural consulting now that we've done all the background. A cultural consultant is someone who works with other creatives to help them represent diverse peoples and backgrounds in their work, especially identities which they themselves do not share, particularly marginalized identities. Different cultural consultants have different specialties, although all of us kind of end up talking a little bit about everything, but like my personal specialty is race, culture, and religion. I try to use the cultural consultant model to make things more fun and creative and positive. So instead of just telling people what they're doing wrong, I'm also giving them like 3 dozen annoying suggestions about creative things that they could do to turn like a possible pitfall instead into an opportunity and to create something which someone from a certain background would feel really excited about.
Yes, despite what you said earlier about just spending 5 hours telling people they're racist, I actually found that working with you was a much more positive and encouraging process. And I love how you put it, that it's more, you get in at a foundational time, which is actually a lot like when we were talking about Sea of Legends, and you try to help steer people away from the mistakes that it's very easy to make when handling marginalized identities and cultures in a game. And so, very thankful that you're here and that you have guided us previously. And
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah, and yes, exactly. It's like that's the thing, is like you can have the best of intentions, but everyone's got blind spots.
Yeah, everyone comes from their own perspective, the intersection of race and culture and gender and class and all that stuff. And so you have your own unique knowledge and your own viewpoint of the world, and it's never going to be holistic enough by itself. So involving the other people is incredibly important, having those checks and balances and all that stuff. Because one person cannot hold all of the viewpoints and knowledge of the world. That's not possible. Exactly. Even with as much research as you can, you're still viewing everything through your own perspective. So yeah, it's incredibly important.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's something I've appreciated in our sort of more recent back and forths, where, you know, trying to get additional insights on specific indigenous cultures in the region. And I feel like I really appreciate that about you, Mendez, where you were just like, hey, let's make sure to really try to find someone specific to that group, not necessarily just adjacent. I mean, if you can't find someone, obviously that's the next best step. But that putting that first, I think, really helps, especially like I think for a designer or a writer who just may not even have access to those groups or doesn't know where to begin. I think having someone like you or anyone else who is a sensitivity reader or cultural consultant on board from the beginning can make those things actually pretty easy. That wasn't a question. That was just a comment.
Well, I'm glad I agree with it, so I'm glad to hear it.
Cool. Now, sort of switch gears. Part of why I thought it would be great to have you both here is also, Kienna, you are the co-creator of the TTRPG safety toolkit.
Oh, I love this thing.
And so additionally, I feel like, to me, you're both creators and writers and voices that I think are making this space more safe and more open and more welcoming. And so I just want to know, for people out there who don't know, what the heck is the toolkit and why did it get created?
Yeah, so the TTRPG Safety Toolkit is a compilation resource created by me and my co-creator, Lauren Bryant-Monk. It is a compilation of a bunch of resources on what safety tools are and how to use them, how to implement them at your table, as well as different conversations and other resources that are out there to help you learn more about them. It kind of came about as a way to fill in the gaps that I saw in the industry of having a central place to learn about safety tools. I first learned about them on a podcast with a friend of mine when she introduced it to me, and I was like, oh, how had I never heard of these before? I've been playing games for like a couple years now. I feel like this is something that would have been really useful to me beforehand. And I started looking and I was like, oh, that's why, because all of these conversations and explanations of what safety tools are or different types of safety tools are all kind of buried on the internet. And as much as we say that everything on the internet is forever, forums get shut down, sites get closed, blog posts get deleted. And so there's all this like incredible information out there that's so useful for people to try to make their table safer and their game safer, that just wasn't being used because it wasn't accessible. And so I started the project first with a quick reference guide for streamer friends of mine to figure out easy ways to implement safety tools onto streams and online play, which is a little less intuitive than having physical cards or whatever. And then it kind of exploded from there. And I brought on my friend Lauren to help me out with it. And so now it's a completely free to use resource that we continually update. It's meant to be a living resource that, as conversations around safety tools and as new safety tools are made every day or whatever, we get to kind of build that out and make a toolkit so that people have a place to go and they can put these tools in their own pocket for their own tables as they need them. That's essentially what it is.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and just like for someone who's like never experienced a safety tool, I guess first of all you should go check out that toolkit. But like, if you could break it down into like the most simplest way for a layperson, how would you describe a safety tool?
So how I describe it in the quick reference guide is that sometimes there are times in games where you are uncomfortable, or you don't feel safe, whether it be good content or people or whatever. And so a safety tool is there as a shorthand for conversation, like I like to use sports metaphors. I don't do sports, but sport metaphors work really well when talking about safety tools. It's a system that's in place that everyone knows what it's about, that's to help people when they're hurt or when they're about to be hurt. So for example, let's say in a basketball game, you have, referees there to call when something happens to a player. You have a system set in place so that even if the player can't talk through their pain, you know exactly what to do. Like, okay, so we're gonna stop the game. We're gonna set them aside. We're gonna check in with them. We will remove another player if needs be. We will do all these systematic things to help make the game continue, work safely for everybody. So yeah, that's essentially what they are. They're short form for those tough types of conversations when someone feels uncomfortable or gets hurt, or going that way, and yeah, helps protect everybody, so that they can play without having to worry about being harmed.
That's great. Yeah, I like the way you put it. That kind of like really snaps something in my mind where it's like, yeah, it is really just like best practices for making sure everyone remains, you know, safe and in a good place, you know, emotionally over the course of the game.
Yeah. Another way that I like to describe them is your safety tools are like a net at a trapeze act, because you hope you never have to use it. You hope that like everything goes off. You get the thrill of like the person soaring through the air and the, ooh, are they going to hit it? But I'd rather have the safety net there than not. And I'd rather have it there so I don't have to clean up the mess afterwards. Like just have that there,
yeah,
and prepared for you know, something happening, because we're all human. We have complicated lives and emotions, and sometimes things will bother you that you never realized bothered you, or is bothering you for that particular game or that session or that day. So it's all just there to help make your games better. Because if you know what boundaries are and you can respect them and work with them really well, then you can really go far with your games. Because if you know where you can't cross the line, then you know you can go really hard on everything else. And and if you know that everyone knows how to say stop, and you know that everyone will respect that, then you also can push harder, because you will have that culture of respect and trust and communication.
Wow. Yeah, that was really well put.
Yeah.
That's great. Trapeze metaphor. I'm going to use that next time someone asks me about what safety tools are.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious too for these sort of two different things we're talking about here with the safety toolkit and with cultural consultation and sensitivity reading. I'm kind of curious, like these practices that you've taken and this research you've done, you know, has this changed the way you write or you design games, and like how?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely has. Although I guess safety tools have always been a really big part of my approach to gaming, because this is my favorite gaming thing to brag about. I was there when the first ever X card was created. The
Some
very
people
first
are
X
some
card.
people are like, what does that mean? I don't know. And then other people are
Well,
like, what?
well, I would go over to my friend John's house and play games every Wednesday night. And in our group was this guy named Todd who really liked to push boundaries. He was really creative in terms of finding boundaries you didn't know you had and then pushing them. Um, so how do we navigate Todd was something that we were often thinking about. And then we also had a friend named Dave, and Dave had really specific preferences about games. Not really a safety stuff, but like genre stuff. If a tone was off or something like that, Dave would get really annoyed about it, but he wouldn't be able to express it until after the game. So one day, John designed a game that involved a lot of writing stuff on index cards, and on one of the index cards, he drew an X. And so when he was explaining the game, he said, "So Dave, I made you this card. And now if something happens that you don't like, just tap the card and, we'll change it." And Dave didn't use the card, but he did get a lot more communicative because the card was there about his preferences. And then afterwards, there were a whole bunch of like emotional safety incidents that happened in the community that that inspired John to change the focus of or broaden the focus of the X card to include those things. So I guess my approach to game design is it's conscious of having those tools there as something that like people are going to want to resort to if they feel a certain way. And I think a lot about how what I'm writing and designing might like push people in those directions. I guess to keep going with the real world metaphors.
More
Another
sports,
thing,
please, so I can understand.
right? More sports. So there's best practices, right? So in a soccer game, if someone gets badly hurt, and then it's the referee's job to blow the whistle and stop the game and then go deal with that. But there's also a tradition in soccer where if you see someone take a hard fall or something like that, no matter what team you're on, no matter what side you're on, you kick the ball out of bounds.
Mm-hmm.
So that even if the referee missed it or something like that, the game stops anyway. I guess the car metaphor is even if there's a guardrail and that's the safety tool, you still don't want to drive around on the shoulder.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was Anne Retschat's metaphor originally. So I guess when I write and design, a lot of the time I'm hired specifically to write about areas close to the shoulder, and I like that territory. I like being able to explore it in games, but one thing that I always try to do, for example, is have that content be something people actively opt into, as opposed to being something that people get like passively pulled into, or that gets like pulled on them as a surprise. When I started out GMing, all the GM advice that I read said that it was really good to surprise your players and to blindside them with all this stuff that they hadn't even thought about. And I thought that was the coolest thing to do in games. And it's the exact opposite of what I want to do now when I'm writing.
It's kind of like to just really like mess with the analogies. It kind of just reminds me of like good storytelling, though. In general, like the good storytelling isn't the twist that no one saw coming. It's the thing you foreshadowed that everyone's been waiting for and expecting, and then the story delivers on.
Yeah, definitely.
Rather.
Yeah, like the best twists and surprises also feel like they've been coming. When it happens, you're like, oh, that's been coming for a really long time, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's inevitable, but still impactful at the same time.
Yeah.
I'm curious for you, Kienna, yeah, from your perspective, I mean, I imagine probably putting together this toolkit, you learned a lot about safety tools also while putting it together.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, how does that change the way you create games?
Yeah, so a lot of the conversations around safety tools have changed as well over the past year since we released the toolkit as a solid resource. Where we're shifting away from the conversations of should we have safety tools, which is at this point we're getting to the point of like, yes, we should have safety tools, which is great. That's awesome. But our conversations are now kind of shifting into how do we make our game design safer? How do we build that culture of safety into the actual systems and products that we're making, rather than being a supplementary thing? Because that's where most safety tools kind of come into play, is that they end up being this add-on almost, rather than a built-in thing. And Kate Bullock actually has this great metaphor that like you should be thinking about safety in games as designing a car. Like you need to have the airbag, you need to have the seat belts, or you're not frickin' going. So
yeah, and also like I shouldn't have to hire someone else to put that airbag in.
Exactly.
It should have came in the first place.
Should already be in there, right? So so that's a great way of thinking about it, and that's really shaped a lot of my game design, especially as of recently. How do we build in the spaces to have those conversations in the game design itself? So it's been a challenge for sure, because it's how do you what facilitates those moments, and a lot of it is like having questions to put in that people can ask each other to check in, because you can just say check in with each other, but what does that mean? If nobody has ever checked in with somebody in a game before, they don't know what to say. And so it's all about if you think of playing a game as a process, you do XYZ until you get to a certain point, and then you need to do ABC instead. And then that's essentially a game. It's a process that sometimes has dice, sometimes has cards in it as part of it. And so you have to build in the safety into that process. So I often now have a built-in decompress part of the game where you have to sit down and talk to each other about your feelings. It's part of the game. You can't opt out of it unless you really don't like it. Then, obviously anyone can do whatever to your system, but it's built in that the default is that you have a safer environment, essentially. So yeah, that's kind of what it's been going with. And Mendez touched on a lot of that stuff too, being able to actively opt into difficult content, being able to express those things at the very beginning of, whatever it is, like say, I want to explore this difficult topic, and everyone have that built-in conversation in the game itself, to say, we want to do this thing. We'll come talk about it like when we hit it as well, but like we know that we would like to explore this topic, or we'd like to experience this thing.
That's really key, right? It's like, it's not saying, the point is not to completely avoid these things, these like troubling or dark or just, whatever highly specific topics. It's just to give you a way to play with them responsibly.
Exactly. And play with other people responsibly, right?
Yeah.
To work empathetically, with respect and all that stuff with other people. Because all games are some act of empathy in some way, whether it's to other players, to yourself, or to characters. And so a huge part of that is it's communicating and being safe. And so the more we can build that into our games, right from their foundation, the better, really.
Now, so that is the perfect segue. Because I was just thinking while you're saying this, I'm like, wow. So then like, if, I'm trying to get into the Kienna Shah, oeuvre, to jump into the catalog, you make a lot of really like great, I feel like I would describe them as like, right, they're tiny, but emotionally, impactful games.
Mm-hmm.
Is kind of the best way I describe it, but I have to throw it out there. And I'm just kind of curious, where would you tell someone to start too? And it's like, you design games, you also stream. Where does someone begin when they want to like, get to know more about you and your work?
Oh, that's very difficult. I'm a person with many, many different hats, and they all show different parts of myself.
It's fair. Give us a tour, I guess, just give us a tour of the hats and where we might start with each.
Yeah. So I do tabletop streaming. I've been doing it for 2 years now, 2.5 years, something like that. Time is fake.
That's forever in streaming time.
Yeah. God, I don't even know at this point.
That's too real.
Yeah, so I co-produce a channel now, Salty Sweet Games, where we produce tabletop RPGs with a diverse cast of people. We joke that we have a token dude on each one. That's very different from other tabletop streams. So that's a great way to start. We have a Pulp Cthulhu series going on right now. We also have a Witcher series and a D&D series. So we do that. As for my other publications and my games, as you mentioned, I have my Itch.io stuff, which
actually, like I would say, just throw out. Do you want to let people know what that actual like URL is too?
Yeah, it's kiennas.itch.io. So yeah, I make a lot of micro RPGs. I think probably my most popular one is Heaven Nor Hell, which is essentially, if you know the cold open to, I think, episode 3 or 4 of Good Omens, where it just does the relationship of the two main characters over time and space. It's that, but a game. So it's this queer romance game. But yeah, I do a lot of emotion-focused, very specific niche experience type games, I think is how I describe them. So people know exactly what they're getting into when they play it. Like, yes, here's the gay game where I play two extra, terrestrial beings who fall in love across time and space. Or
I feel like you said that's niche, but I feel like that probably that like appeals to a lot of people, actually.
I mean, yeah, but the experience that you play with it is just that, rather than, a system like D&D where you can play a lot of different experiences in D&D. They all kind of fit into a broad general experience, but you can play lots of different things in D&D. Heaven Nor Hell had a very specific emotional experience. All my other games have very specific emotional experiences to them, but I kind of think that's where I do best. It's just picking an experience I want the players to have and just making that happen.
Yeah, it's very focused and directed.
Yeah,
I would say is the good way to describe
a
it.
lot of my games have a very like a narrator voice. Like I'm telling you how to play this game. Like you do this and then you do this, and all of the language also fits into it. So it's like language, tone, theme, gameplay, all of that kind of just meld together into a 2-pager.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be like, here you go. Here's your brochure. You're like, what? How did this all fit on here? Amazing. Well, that's really great. So thank you for giving us a little more context there about the many hats and Heaven or Hell. Check it out, guys. Check it out, y'all. And Mendez, well, you also wear a few different hats, actually.
Yeah. So yeah, depending what you're into, well, a great place to start is my website, jamesmendezhodes.com. So right now, that website is mostly me complaining about orcs. I'm a big orc fan, and I have a lot to say about orcs.
These are deep articles too. Like I've spent some time on this website. It's like you will learn something from this website. Like I love that about your work.
Yeah. So I think that if you like what I've been saying, you should check this out. And if you don't like what I've been saying, you should also check it out and then leave me an angry comment. But yeah, so I have a series of articles about all kinds of different things, like how to play a character who's not of the same ethnicity as you, how to represent religion in your games, how to represent the relationship between Asians and martial arts, for example. But I think the best known articles are these 2 articles that I wrote about the racial dimensions of orcs, the fantasy creature. When I started researching the articles, I thought that orcs had just been created by Tolkien and then especially by other people as this sort of general purpose people of color stereotype species. I was wrong. J.R.R. Tolkien purpose-built orcs as an Asian stereotype. And then Dungeons and Dragons took that original stereotype and then took it in different directions that were peculiar to American ethnic dynamics and conflict. So I have a couple of articles there. And in addition, there's links to a lot of my other work. I've written a lot for 7th Sea. My current, and I've done a lot of cultural consulting on a lot of random little projects. My current, the thing that occupies the most time for me right now is a game called Thousand Arrows. Thousand Arrows is an apocalypse world hack that's about the Japanese Warring States period. We kickstarted it 2 Novembers ago, and it should be coming out this year, COVID-19 willing. But yeah,
fingers crossed for you.
Yeah, so if you like, it's like a high-powered samurai narrative based on stuff like Kurosawa Akira films. So you're playing like the Oda Nobunaga's and Date Masamune's of the Warring States period, really powerful people who are controlling armies and clans and religions and kind of shaping the course of history. There's a lot of I also intend for it to be kind of a toolkit for learning how to play in historical settings, which is a topic that a lot of people are really nervous about. The Japanese Warring States period is an easier one to play in than a lot of historical settings because it was a time when ceremony and tradition and chivalry and the right thing to do all were much less important than whether you could get a whole bunch of guns and shoot somebody first. So I think it's like an easy on-ramp to the topic of historical gaming. But yeah, there's lots of treachery and gunpowder and moving armies around. It's also I also tried to. It's a game about armies and militaries and strategy, but it consciously boils a lot of those topics down to the kind of broad strokes that those of us like me who don't have a military background and who don't know about military science in any kind of a formal sense can still engage with. So like finding the story, the narrative beats within that context, and making a whole bunch of intimidating topics accessible to people who just want to tell a cool story about people falling in love and backstabbing each other.
Mm. Yeah, that, I mean, so it is all about the narrative of being that general or being that great warlord, and less so about being like an actual like military manager simulator.
Yes, the thing in the game that is least detailed is the mechanics of how you win a battle or not. There are parts of it that like certain character specialties will have, like there will be like one part of fighting that your character zooms in on. Like the Shimazu clan has this one formation that they always use. Everyone knew they used it, and 8 times in history they came to the battlefield and used the exact same tactic that everyone knew they used, and it always works. So the Shimazu clan is really good at doing exactly that. But in all of these cases, we talked a little bit earlier about like opt-in content.
Mm-hmm.
The way you build your character is essentially a set of signals to the other people in the game and to the GM about what kinds of things you want to focus on in the game. If you choose to play a fox spirit, that brings a lot of supernatural content to the game that wouldn't necessarily be there if everybody is just playing as like knights and farmers and so forth. So that idea of like opting into certain content, which I think I got from Safety Tools originally, also is present in these other directions of game design.
That's honestly all sounds really fun, and I would have to say, like, really though, check out that website and those articles, because I think not only will you think more deeply about orcs, but the idea of like a throwaway enemy that you can just sort of like righteously kill without like really engaging in them having a culture or having backgrounds that are significant matter. I don't know.
Yeah, that could
Correct
be
me if I'm off base, but
no, it's an awkward topic for some people.
Yeah, but there's another takeaway for me.
Yeah.
Save that for another podcast.
I love it.
Well, cool. I think one of the last questions I really have, which I guess I'm here to talk about Sea of Legends, but honestly, I just was so interested in hearing more of what you guys had to say, so I'm glad we focused on that. But I'm just curious, for people who are fans of your work, what do you think they're gonna enjoy? What do you think they're gonna find in Sea of Legends that might also call to them?
For me particularly, I'm really interested in going back to my roots of interactive fiction here, which again has formed the foundation for any game design I've ever done. And also, as I have told social media and Twitter, I got to playtest Sea of Legends, and I really enjoyed all of the interpersonal parts of it. And then I yelled at Ryan to make it gayer and to add more smooches, because I wanted the 2 burly pirates to smooch, and they couldn't in that iteration of the game. And so we're at the point now where I am here writing about gays in this game, and they get to smooch. So
yeah, that was like a note. I was like then becoming you, and I was like, wait, there should be more smooching in this story.
Yeah. But yeah, I think what the cool part of Sea of Legends is that there's a lot of room for the emotional experience, and there's also a lot of room for the play to win aspects of games, and it's a really cool meshing of that, where the mechanics and the story feel like they work together. So yeah, if people like all of the thematic things coming together in my own games and the emotional, very intimate parts of my games, you'll really like kind of that parts of Sea of Legends, and you'll likely like my my own adventure that I'm writing for it.
Yeah, I definitely think I took your words to heart and just like continued to figure out how to make our game more into like a queer pirate dating simulator the more I've worked on it. So
Perfect.
that's all thanks to you.
Yay.
Oh man. And yeah, Mendez, so, for fans of your work.
So the plurality of my work still, I think, I got all these 7C books up here. Like the plurality of my work is still like pirate adventures. And the like one of the best I think one of the best, the strongest books in the 7th Sea line was the one that we wrote about the Caribbean analog. So I think that so one thing that John with Presents always wanted to do that never really worked out was making like a huge epic board game. That never happened. And Sea of Legends, I think, is the kind of game that the team would have wanted to make if we'd had, infinite time and infinite budget and everything. So I think that if you're here for the pirate adventure, yeah, you're gonna get that. And then like there's a whole bunch of stuff I'll be doing as cultural consultant where if I do my job right, there's all this stuff that you won't be seeing.
Yeah.
So you can look forward to like a lack of certain things that I often rail against. There's going to be no racist orcs for one thing. Can I talk about one of the changes that we made in the outlining stage?
Yeah, I think that'd be great, actually.
Great. So one of the villains in Sea of Legends that or the villainous factions that I find most exciting are the conquistadors. And what's the name of that faction at this point?
Yeah, so that they now it's been a minute. Originally, who knows what we called them, but they are the Dread Tide.
That's awesome.
Thanks.
Yeah, so
That's good to hear.
I can trace my real life family back to conquistadors, actually, who we're not really sure. We think they were probably Sephardic Jews who ran away from Spain to oppress somebody else so that they would stop getting oppressed. So they went to oppress Asians, and then eventually they became Asians. So I have some personal complicated ties to this concept.
Yeah, I'd say.
So the conquistadors were they were originally the zombie conquistadors, and one of the changes that I encouraged Ryan to make, which we made, was to move them away from that zombie archetype, because especially in a Caribbean context, a zombie means something very, very specific and very real in the context of Haitian voodoo. There's the term zombie goes back to West Central Africa, and then it has like very specific meanings in different African religious contexts, and then especially in the Caribbean, it has this specific meaning that has been stigmatized and mythologized to the point where what a zombie means to a voodoo practitioner is overshadowed by zombie apocalypses and zombies and everything from like Dungeons and Dragons to Call of Duty. So we shifted them to be skeleton conquistadors, which I really liked because that was when the skeleton war meme was getting really popular. So you can now join the skeleton war against the skeleton conquistadors, the Dread Tide.
Yes.
And there's this awesome like giant like super skeleton boss that you get to fight. Or if you play your cards really wrong, I think you can still join them or something like that. It's bad.
Yeah, you can still go full on I guess Servant of the Dark Lord. But okay. I mean, that conversation like that we had, I mean, yeah, so we got to change them more to be undead soldiers, and we got the zombie terminology out of there. And then I think like also partially just as we like evolved their depictions of all these factions, we were like, hey, we need there to be, ways that they cannot just, if these guys are supposedly just all bad guys, that's not a very nuanced depiction, and we want them to have more dimension, and we want there to be other characters. They're not just like, rawr, rawr, I'm a zombie, again, because they're not zombies. They have personalities, and they have things to say, and you might actually find out that you like them and want to work with them, or that some of them maybe are just cursed and don't really even want to be there. They don't particularly like doing the marauding, and it's just wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah, Yeah, so I think that's a really cool thing that this game does in terms of like, especially in a lot of these like controlled storytelling contexts, like video games especially. The only opportunity that the medium has to represent a certain culture or a certain mythology is through an enemy that you had to fight.
Yeah.
And I think Sea of Legends complicates those relationships as often as possible. So like sometimes, yeah, you're going to fight people, but then other times, like you can join them, you can make out with the monsters, and that's great.
I see so many times when people are just delighted when they finally get to romance a merfolk and, you know, are lovingly grasped by all the tentacles.
Yeah,
that seems to really make people's days.
The sexy merfolk fandom is strong within
Yeah.
TTRPGs, so you know.
You know, if you're a pirate, you gotta.
Yeah.
That is like, yeah, that's the true pirate's fantasy, is they're
Absolutely.
stuck at sea. Cool. Well, awesome. Thank you both for those kind words, and really glad you're both involved in Sea of Legends. And so, I mean, to wrap it up, I suppose, you know, where can people find you? Let's just like push them directly to you. Go follow and support these people if you are at all interested in anything they've had to say today.
JamesMendezHodes.com and at Lula Vampiro on Twitter. Read my stuff, argue with me about it. I'm out there.
I'm out there. I'm out there, ready to be argued with.
Yeah.
Yes. I got there's a Scholastic, not Scholastic, a Simon and Schuster anthology of little games coming out soon.
Yeah, we're both in that.
Oh, we are? Awesome. Yeah, definitely pre-order that right now. We're both in it. I wrote a tiny little game about it's about sports actually. It's about sports. It's about how I've been watching a lot of sumo wrestling in isolation, and the worst part of sumo wrestling is when they try to interview the wrestler after he's just thrown a 400-pound man out of a ring and he just wants to like go home and sleep, and they're like, so what were you thinking when you threw that 400-pound man out? And he's like, I want to win. What are you going to do in the tournament tomorrow? Wrestle? So it's a game about reporters asking increasingly ridiculous questions to athletes who just want to go home and sleep.
I love that the whole like list for that book is stacked. I think we've got some other members on the team, like Nell mentioned it earlier today.
Nice.
So this is like a must-buy book in my opinion.
Yeah. And you can find me over on Twitter at Kienna S. It's the best way to figure out what I'm doing. Come over the internet doing TTRPG stuff, whether that's streaming or writing or just generally screaming into the void. Because sometimes you just gotta do that. As Mendez mentioned, there's this RPG anthology. I wrote a game about being a lone swordsman sent out to stop your once closest companion, now enemy, and the journey you take along the way, and all the memories that you reminisce about to decide whether you actually go through with it or not. Yeah, so it's emotional. It's
nice.
It's very queer coded as well. So if you like my stuff, there's that. And there's also my itch.io page, which I have all of my little micro games. I have a few releases upcoming, including a solo journaling game based on Orpheus and Eurydice. So if you like your Greek mythos, I'm releasing that shortly. So yeah, this will be exciting.
That all sounds really great. So like, yeah, y'all are real talented. That's why we're working together.
Yay.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and we'll be back with more updates next time.